The RUFF Show. Ruff, 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 ruff.
The RUFF Show.
Ruff, ruff, ruff.
The RUFF Show.
Ruff, ruff, ruff.
Hello, YouTube fans. The RUFF Show is back. Don't ask where it went, because I don't even know. I think it's there. So, yeah, an update, I guess. The Birds of Prey has launched a new trailer, and I love it. But then again, I didn't. When I saw Suicide Squad, it was with my one of my best friends, Michael Lake. And then I saw it with my ex-girlfriend, Katie. And then I saw it with George, my best friend now. And I fell asleep. But I'd already seen the damn movie 3 times in theaters, in the cut version, and oh god, that sucked. But then I saw the original version, I'm like, oh, this is better. And then I read the book, which was even better. So technically, the opening to this should be for Suicide Squad. But it's not. It's not for several reasons, actually. Oh, I know. Never mind. I had the book, now I don't. But no. So the reason I ever started writing The Wrongdoer, though no one really knows what it is or cares, they don't know The Wrongdoer. Which technically should be my first thing I should do, right? No, it's not the first thing I'm doing. First thing I'm going to do is read this beautiful book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Now, why am I reading this? On the RUFF Show. I am reading this for 2 reasons. First reason is it's a beautiful book. Second reason is because I can. Alright, here we go. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. So, my computer is overheating, so that's just going to be fun. It may crash, even though it's charging. I don't know. The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful, as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and the greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull, grey Tuesday our story starts, there was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away, happily, as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. Little tyke, chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar, a cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat, standing on the corner of a Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, Jules was driven out of his mind by something else. And as he sat in the usual morning traffic, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about, people in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw in young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell to a huddle sorry. This is what happens when I get cut out of my computer. Oh, fiddlesticks. Nobody swears anymore. Oh, fuck you. Oh, good. But on the edge of town, Drills was driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about, people in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw in young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of it! But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings car park, his mind back on Jules. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the ninth floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it hard to concentrate on Jules that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight. Though people down the street did, they pointed and gazed open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This lot were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. He was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag, that he caught a few words of what they were saying. The bookers? That's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son, Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers, as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at security not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no. He was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter, who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he'd had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon. When he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as a tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice, and the passerby stared, "Don't be sorry, my dear, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who is gone." Shouldn't be who? Rejoice, for you know who is gone at last. Even muggles like yourselves should be celebrating this happy day. And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted in his spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped for, because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he'd spotted that morning. It was now sitting on the garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. "Shoo!" said to Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move, just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter, and how Dudley had learned to know you are now not in the shop. Yeah, can you just not talk to me now? And learned a new word, shot. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went to the living room to catch... Go away. You're in the video.
Can you do this in another location?
No, I'm already starting. I'm not reading that loudly. Just goodbye. He went into the living room and time to cast the last report in the evening news. Finally, bird watchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newsreader allowed himself a grin, most mysterious. And now over to Jim McGuffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating Bonfire Night early. It's not until next week, folks. But I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain. Owls flying by daylight. Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place. And a whisper about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As he had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. Yo, he said sharply. Why? These stuff on the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owls, shooting stars, and there were a lot of funny-looking people in town there. So? Snapped Mrs. Dursley. Well, I just thought maybe something to do with, her lot? Mrs. Dursley sipped his tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he'd heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said, as casually as he could, third son, he'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, said Mrs. Dursley stiffly. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry. That's the common name, if you ask me. Oh, yes, Mr. Dursley's heart seemed horrible. Yes, I agree. He didn't say another word on the subject as he went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept to the bedroom window and peered down at the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Privet Drive as though it was waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of, well, he didn't think he could bear it. But Dursley's gone to bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. Potters knew very well that he and Petunia thought what... Oh, no, sorry. The Potters knew very well that he and Petunia... What... Oh, my God. You're kidding me. The Potters knew very well what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed in the next street, nor when 2 owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently you would have thought he just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and his eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen in Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak which swept the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles. His nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize that he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something. But he did seem to realize he was being watched because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, I should have known. He had found what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer until the only lights left in the whole street were 2 tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone looked out of their window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside his coat and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." He turned to smile at Tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses, exactly the shape of the markings the cat had round its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly." "You'd be stiff if you've been sitting on a brick wall all day," Professor McGonagall. "All day? When you could have been celebrating. I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here." Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. "Oh yes, everyone's celebrating all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no. Even Muggles would know something's going on. It was on their news." She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. "I heard it. Flocks of owls, shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. We're bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I'll bet those devils Diggle never had much sense." "You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. "I know that," said Professor McGonagall irritatingly. "There's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless, out in the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in Muggle clothes, swapping rumors." She threw a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't, so she went on. "Fine thing it would be if, on the very day you-know-who seems to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about us all. I suppose he really is gone. Dumbledore?" "It certainly seems so," said Dumbledore. "We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a sherbet lemon?" "A what?" "A sherbet lemon. They're a kind of Muggle sweet I'm rather fond of." "No, thank you," Professor McGonagall coldly, although she didn't think this was the moment for sherbet lemons. "As I say, even if you knew who has gone." "My dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name, all this you-know-who nonsense. For 11 years I've been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort." Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 sherbet lemons, seemed not to know. "It all gets so confusing if you keep saying you-know-who. I've never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name." "I know you haven't," said Professor McGonagall, sounding half excited, inspired and half admiring. "But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one you-know-who. Oh, all right, Voldemort was frightened of." "You flatter me," said Dumbledore calmly. "Voldemort has had powers I will never have. Only because you're too, well, noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs." Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, "The owls are nothing to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying? About why he's disappeared? About what finally stopped him?" It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss, the real reason she'd been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day. For neither as a cat nor as a woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it. So Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another sherbet lemon and nicer. "They're saying," she pressed on, "is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter are that they're dead." Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. "James, I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it. Oh, Albus." Dumbledore reached down, patted her on the shoulder. "I know," he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as well. "That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry, but he couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how. But they're saying when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's powers somehow broke. And that's why he's gone." Dumbledore nodded grimly. It's true!" faltered Professor McGonagall. "After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy? It's just astounding. Of all the things to stop him, but how in the name of heaven did Harry survive?" "We can only guess," said Dumbledore. "We may never know." Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff. He took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very old watch, and it had 12 hands but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said, "Hagrid's light." I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way? Yes, Miss McGonagall. I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places. I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left now. You can't mean the people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and putting it in before. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find two people who are less like us. And they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, come and live here. It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. At the end of a letter. A letter? Repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down the wall. Really, Dumbledore, you think we can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend, and we'd be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very serious over his half-moon spectacles. It would be enough to turn any boy's head. Famous before he can walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'll be growing up from all that until he's ready to take it? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, and swallowed, and said, Yes, you're right, of course, but how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly as though she thought he might be hiding Harry underneath it. Hagrid, I think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, Professor McGonagall, but you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to. What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for some sign of a headlight. It swelled to a roar as they both looked up at the sky, and a huge motorbike fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. If the motorbike was huge, nothing to the man sitting astride it. It was almost twice as tall as a normal man. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man, and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be loud. He was so wild. Long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. His hands the size of dustbin lids. His feet in the leather boots were like baby dolphins. In his vast muscular arms he was holding a bundle of bundles. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. At last. And where did you get that motorbike? Bought it, Brother Dumbledore, sir, said I, climbing carefully off of the motorbike at his boat. Young, serious black letter, Lily. I've got him, sir. No problem, sir. No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but I got him out all right, over the muggle stars sworn around. He fell asleep as we were flying over Bristol. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Instead, just visible, was a baby boy, fast asleep. Under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead, they could see a curiously shaped cut, like a bolt of lightning. Is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Yes, said Dumbledore. I've had that scar forever. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I have one myself, over my left knee, which is a perfect map of the London Underground. Well, give him here, Hagrid. We'd better get this over with. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned towards the Dursley's house. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid. He bent his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whispery kiss. But suddenly Hagrid let out a howl like a wind dog. Hissed Professor McGonagall. Sobbed Hagrid, picking a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. I can't stand it. And the giant's dead. And little poor Harry up there for muggles. Yes, it's all very sad. Get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or you'll be found. It will be found then as well. Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out of his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously. The twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. Well, said Dumbledore finally, that's that. We've no business staying here. We might as well go and join the celebration. Yeah, said Hagrid in a very muffled voice. Let's get this bike away. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir. Wiping his streaming eyes and shaggy sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorbike and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to him. Professor McGonagall blew her nose. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took out the silver putter-outer. Clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back to their street lamps so that Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange. He could make out a tabby cat, slinking around the corner, the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets on step of number 4. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. He turned on his heel, and with the swish of his cloak, he was gone. A breeze, ruffled the neat hedges of privet drive, which lay silent and tidy in the leafy sky. The very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over and beside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on a letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing that he would be woken in a few hours by Mrs. Dursley screaming as she opened the front door and put out the milk bottle. Nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices,
To Harry Potter.